When a wealthy man left his wall safe wide open, he thought he was clever, setting a trap to catch his maid stealing. But what she did next didn't just shock him, it changed his life forever. You won't believe how this story ends. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Naomi was a single mother in her early 30s, the kind of woman who carried the world on her shoulders but never let it weigh down her smile. Her eyes told stories of sacrifice and love. Her hands were rough from labor but graceful in movement, and her heart beat for one thing above all else: her 10-year-old son, Micah. She worked 6 days a week as a maid in the sprawling estate of Victor Langston, a self-made millionaire known more for his cold stares than his warm gestures. The house was grand. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed curtains, and every inch of it demanded perfection. Naomi delivered that perfection daily. She arrived before sunrise, her uniform always crisp, hair neatly tied back, an attitude quietly dignified. She didn't gossip with the others, didn't linger over lunch, and never once asked for special treatment. Other staff admired her discipline. Some whispered she was too good to be working here. Victor, however, hardly knew she existed. To him, Naomi was just another uniform, efficient, replaceable. He didn't even know her last name. But over time, he began to observe her. She never missed a day, never muttered a complaint. When others cut corners, she stayed behind to make things right. She scrubbed floors on her knees and polished silverware until it gleamed. And it annoyed Victor in a way he couldn't explain. How could someone with so little give so much without ever expecting anything back? So, one morning, curiosity gave birth to something else, a test. The heavy door creaked open to reveal bricks of cash, diamond necklaces, and antique watches worth more than Naomi's entire yearly salary. He left it wide open. Temptation, plain as day. Then he waited. He stayed just down the hall, silent as a shadow, listening through the thin walls. Footsteps approached, soft, sure, and familiar. Naomi entered the room, humming gently to herself, mop bucket in hand. She began dusting the baseboards first, then moved to wipe down the window panes, completely unaware of the gaping safe in the corner. Victor strained his ears. Then silence. She must have seen it. He imagined her eyes widening at the sight. A poor, overworked maid standing before more wealth than she could earn in 10 lifetimes. He waited for the sound of rustling bills, the clink of jewels being pocketed, even a nervous breath. But instead, he heard something else, the sharp squeak of the oil painting being gently pushed back over the safe. Then, the click of the mop bucket's wheels. Naomi had simply turned away and kept cleaning. Victor blinked in disbelief. A minute later, she called out from the hallway, her voice steady. "Mr. Langston? I think the safe door might have been left open by accident. I covered it, but you may want to double-check." He didn't answer. Instead, he sat back in his leather chair, stunned. In a world where he trusted no one, where even his business partners had tried to steal from him, this woman, a maid, had just passed a test that most executives would have failed. Later that evening, Naomi returned home to her small apartment on the edge of town. Micah was waiting, excited to show her the he got on his math test. They ate leftover pasta and shared stories over the dim kitchen light. Naomi never mentioned what happened at work. She didn't need to. But back at the mansion, something had changed. The next morning, Naomi arrived to find a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter with her name. Naomi Johnson, handwritten in gold ink. Inside was a note. "Loyalty is rare. Integrity is priceless. Thank you for reminding me that both still exist. Victor Langston." Tucked beneath the note was a bonus check, one that could pay off every debt she had, cover Micah's school tuition, and maybe even let her take a day off for the first time in years. Naomi smiled softly. She folded the note, pocketed the check, and went straight to work. Same uniform, same routine, same dignity. She wasn't honest because someone was watching. She was honest because that's who she was. Naomi entered the study exactly at 11 a.m. Just like always. Routine was second nature to her. Clean the baseboards, dust the shelves, sanitize the desk. But this time, something stopped her cold. The safe, Victor Langston's personal wall safe, the one she'd only ever seen glimpses of behind a massive oil painting, was wide open. Stacks of crisp $100 bills. Velvet pouches overflowing with diamonds. Designer watches glinting in the light. She froze mid-step, the feather duster still in her hand, her breath caught in her chest. Victor watched silently from his office downstairs. Unbeknownst to Naomi, he had installed a hidden camera inside an antique lamp in the corner of the room, part of a private test he had carefully orchestrated. The main hallway cameras had been turned off, and no one else knew. Only this feed, hidden, silent, and perfectly positioned, was rolling. He leaned in, eyes glued to the screen. "Now let's see what you're really made of," he muttered under his breath, fingers steepled beneath his chin. From a moment Naomi entered, her body language told a story, not one of greed, but of disbelief. She stepped forward slowly, cautiously, her brow furrowed as she peered inside the safe. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. Anyone would have assumed she was tempted. Victor did, but what happened next shocked him. Naomi didn't reach for the cash. She didn't even lean closer. She simply stared for a long second, then turned her gaze to the rest of the room as if checking to see if someone had made a mistake or was setting a trap. Then, with remarkable composure, she walked over to the desk and found Notepad. Victor squinted at the feed, confused. Naomi scribbled something quickly, then returned to the safe. She gently closed the heavy door, realigned the painting with both hands, careful to make sure it looked untouched, and placed the note neatly on the center of the polished desk. And without hesitation, she picked up her duster and walked out. No glances back, no fidgeting, no signs of guilt, just grace. Victor stared at the screen, stunned. This woman, this quiet, overlooked maid he'd barely said a full sentence to, had just passed a test most of his millionaire friends would have failed without blinking. He bolted up from his chair and rushed down the hall to the study, the soles of his Italian leather shoes thudding across the marble. When he entered the room, the safe was exactly as Naomi had left it, closed, secure, hidden. He walked over to the desk and snatched the note. The handwriting was clean, steady, and thoughtful. "Mr. Langston, I believe you forgot to close your safe. I didn't touch anything, but I thought you should know. Naomi." That was it. No drama. No excuses. No demands for recognition. Victor stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. He didn't know how to feel. Embarrassed? Humbled? Ashamed? He had set a trap, expecting to confirm what he already believed about people, that everyone had a price. That loyalty was just a matter of opportunity. But Naomi had reminded him that integrity, real integrity, doesn't ask for reward. It just is. Later that night, Victor did something he hadn't done in years. He cooked dinner for himself. No private chef, no catered delivery. Just a quiet meal and a lot of thinking. He reviewed Naomi's file. Single mother. High school graduate. No complaints on record. No late arrivals. No warnings. Her references spoke of character, not just competence. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the mansion at 6:45 a.m., as usual. Her uniform was pressed. Her bun was tight. Her demeanor calm. She had no idea anything unusual had happened until she reached the kitchen. There, sitting on a marble counter, was a white envelope with her name, Naomi Johnson, handwritten in elegant black ink. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short letter. "Naomi, some lessons can't be taught. They have to be witnessed. Thank you for showing me what character really looks like. Victor Langston." Tucked beneath the letter was a check with more zeros than she had ever seen in her life. A full year's salary as a bonus. Tears welled up in her eyes. Not because of the money, though that meant a new life for her and Micah, but because someone had finally seen her. Not just as a maid, not just as help, but as a woman of principle. Naomi folded the letter with care, tucked it into her bag, and tied her apron. There were still rooms to clean. But this time, she did it with a small, quiet smile. Later that afternoon, Victor Langston did something he rarely did. He asked for a one-on-one meeting with a member of his household staff. He told his assistant to send Naomi to his office. She arrived 10 minutes later, wiping her hands on a cloth, clearly just coming from the kitchen. Her posture was straight, her uniform still neat despite the long day. But there was a faint tension in her eyes, the kind people carry when they're used to being blamed for things they didn't do. Naomi stood just inside the door. "You asked to see me, sir?" Victor looked up from his chair, holding the folded note she had left on his desk just hours earlier. He studied her for a moment, silently, as if trying to make sense of her, as if seeing her for the first time. "Close the door," he said. She did quietly. Then she stood, hands folded in front of her, waiting. Victor leaned back slightly in his chair and lifted the note. "You saw the safe," he said at last. "You saw what was inside. Why didn't you?" He trailed off. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Naomi didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, steady. "Because it doesn't belong to me, sir." Victor blinked. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no righteousness either. Just a plain truth, the kind people rarely say out loud anymore. He let out a long breath, clearly caught off guard. "You're the first person in a long time who's proven me wrong," he said quietly. "I thought I'd seen enough of the world to stop expecting honesty. I've been stolen from, lied to, backstabbed, even by people with expensive suits and fancy titles." Naomi remained quiet. She wasn't one to speak unless she had something worth saying. Victor continued, his voice lower now. "I've known politicians who smiled to my face and sued me the next day. Investors who swore loyalty while siphoning money out the back door. I've even had family try to take what wasn't theirs." He looked up, eyes meeting hers. "But you, a woman who's probably been overlooked by every guest that's walked through these halls, you didn't take a thing. You didn't hesitate. You didn't even act like it was tempting." Naomi offered a soft smile. "That's because it wasn't," she said gently. "I have a son, Mr. Langston. His name is Micah. He watches everything I do. I'd rather go home tired and broke than look him in the eyes knowing I failed him." Victor's expression shifted. That name, Micah, grounded everything. It wasn't about the money. "But you, a woman who's probably been overlooked by every guest that's walked through these halls, you didn't take a thing. You didn't hesitate. You didn't even act like it was tempting." Naomi offered a soft smile. "That's because it wasn't," she said gently. "I have a son, Mr. Langston. His name is Micah. He watches everything I do. I'd rather go home tired and broke than look him in the eyes knowing I failed him." Victor's expression shifted. That name, Micah, grounded everything. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the test. It was about something deeper. Legacy. "I'm sorry," he said after a pause, "for doubting you, for putting you in that position in the first place." Naomi didn't hesitate this time. "You don't need to test people to find their worth, Mr. Langston," she replied. "You just need to watch how they treat others when no one's watching." The room fell into a long silence. Victor stared at her, this woman he had never really spoken to, never really seen, and realized how much he'd missed simply by assuming silence meant insignificance. "I used to think loyalty could be bought," he said, "that people only stuck around if you paid them enough." Naomi shook her head softly. "Loyalty isn't about money. It's about respect." That landed hard. Victor stood and walked to a nearby cabinet, pulling out a slim, black envelope. He handed it to her. She opened it slowly, revealing a formal letter of promotion and a generous raise, far beyond what she ever expected from the job. "You deserve more than a bonus," he said. "You deserve to be recognized." Naomi glanced at the letter, then back at Victor. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. "But I would have done the same even without this." He smiled for the first time that day. "I know." As she turned to leave, Victor spoke once more. "You've changed the way I see things, Naomi. Maybe not just in this house, but in life." She paused at the door, then nodded. That's how change starts, one honest moment at a time. Then she walked out, quiet as ever. But this time, Victor didn't see a maid. He saw a leader, a teacher, a woman who had just given him something he didn't even know he needed: hope. The next few weeks at the Langston estate felt different, subtle at first, but unmistakable. The staff whispered about it in the kitchen and hallways. The air seemed lighter. The tension that once clung to the mansion like heavy drapes had begun to lift. And at the center of it all was Victor Langston, the man no one thought would ever change. He was still stern, still quiet. But something fundamental had shifted. He started greeting staff by name, not just Naomi, but everyone. The gardeners, the kitchen assistants, the night cleaners. He looked them in the eye, asked about their families, and actually waited for the answer. It was jarring. Most of the employees had worked under Victor for years without hearing more than a gruff, "Thank you," or "Handle it." Now, he lingered after conversations, smiled even. There were no grand speeches or over-the-top gestures, just a noticeable presence, as if he'd finally realized the people around him weren't just part of the house. They were the heart of it. Naomi, of course, was still her usual composed self. She hadn't changed, but how people looked at her had. Victor began to speak with her regularly, sometimes even asking for her opinion on things like event planning or staff scheduling. One afternoon, he casually inquired about her son. Naomi, a bit surprised, told him that Micah was doing well in school, but she was working 2 other part-time jobs just to afford his tuition and books. That's how change starts, one honest moment at a time. Then she walked out, quiet as ever. But this time, Victor didn't see a maid. He saw a leader, a teacher, a woman who had just given him something he didn't even know he needed: hope. The next few weeks at the Langston estate felt different, subtle at first, but unmistakable. The staff whispered about it in the kitchen and hallways. The air seemed lighter. The tension that once clung to the mansion like heavy drapes had begun to lift. And at the center of it all was Victor Langston, the man no one thought would ever change. He was still stern, still quiet. But something fundamental had shifted. He started greeting staff by name, not just Naomi, but everyone. The gardeners, the kitchen assistants, the night cleaners. He looked them in the eye, asked about their families, and actually waited for the answer. It was jarring. Most of the employees had worked under Victor for years without hearing more than a gruff, "Thank you," or "Handle it." Now, he lingered after conversations, smiled even. There were no grand speeches or over-the-top gestures, just a noticeable presence, as if he'd finally realized the people around him weren't just part of the house. They were the heart of it. Naomi, of course, was still her usual composed self. She hadn't changed, but how people looked at her had. Victor began to speak with her regularly, sometimes even asking for her opinion on things like event planning or staff scheduling. One afternoon, he casually inquired about her son. Naomi, a bit surprised, told him that Micah was doing well in school, but she was working 2 other part-time jobs just to afford his tuition and books. Victor said nothing in that moment, just nodded. But the next week, Naomi received a letter from Micah's school. At first, she thought it was a billing notice. Her stomach tightened as she opened it, until she read the words: "Congratulations. A full academic scholarship has been awarded to Micah Johnson for the remainder of his schooling, including supplies and extracurriculars." Tears welled at her eyes right there at the bus stop. She knew who had done it. Victor never mentioned it, not once. But she didn't need him to. The gesture was written in silence, the way the most genuine kindness often is. Shortly after, Victor called her into his office again. This time, it wasn't a test or a conversation. It was a formal offer. He promoted her to house manager, the highest-ranking position among the domestic staff. It came with double her previous salary, benefits, and a flexible schedule, so she could finally attend Micah's school events without rushing between jobs. When she asked, "Why me?" Victor simply replied, "Because you lead without needing a title. It's about time your title caught up." Word of her promotion spread quickly. At first, a few staff wondered if she was given special treatment. But any doubts were short-lived. Everyone had seen how Naomi carried herself, with quiet strength, fairness, and unmatched dedication. She had earned every bit of it. But what Naomi received went far beyond money or job titles. She earned something far more valuable: respect. Not just from Victor, but from everyone who watched her rise, not by ambition or politics, but by character. Her story spread far beyond the walls of the Langston estate. It began circulating among other estate owners and house managers. Employers whispered it during interviews. "Have you heard what Naomi Johnson did at the Langston house?" Her name became shorthand for integrity, a living legend, not because she exposed someone, but because she didn't. Housekeepers from nearby neighborhoods spoke of her with pride, one of their own who had shown the world that morality isn't a luxury. It's a choice. Naomi never let the attention go to her head. She still walked the same way, still wore her uniform with pride, still asked about others before talking about herself. But now, people leaned in a little closer when she spoke. They listened. They followed. Micah, too, noticed something different. His mom didn't seem as tired anymore. She smiled more. She even started helping him with homework instead of rushing off to her next shift. One night, he asked her, "Why did Mr. Langston give me a scholarship?" Naomi smiled, brushing his curls back from his forehead. "Because sometimes, when you do the right thing, it helps more people than you'll ever realize." And she was right. Because integrity, real integrity, doesn't just protect your name. It inspires others to protect their own. And in that grand mansion, where silence once echoed down the halls, the story of a single, honest woman continued to speak louder than any riches ever could. A year had passed since the day Naomi quietly closed a millionaire's open safe and walked away without taking a thing. But in that time, everything had changed. Naomi was no longer the quiet maid who moved through the Langston estate unnoticed. She was now the house manager, overseeing the entire staff with poise, compassion, and quiet authority. Her schedule had changed too. No more late-night buses or juggling 3 jobs. She had weekends off, attended Micah's soccer games, and even hosted Sunday dinners for her neighbors. But more than her circumstances, it was Naomi's influence that had transformed the house. Victor Langston's once stiff mansion now pulsed with life and warmth. The staff no longer whispered in the halls or avoided eye contact. They laughed, collaborated, and most importantly, felt seen. And it all traced back to Naomi's example. She had become a mentor. Every new hire, whether a gardener or a junior chef, was first scheduled for a one-on-one with her, not for rules, but for values. She spoke to them about responsibility, humility, and the importance of doing the right thing even when no one's watching. And Victor? He became a different man, too. Less cynical, more curious. He asked questions now about people's lives, their goals. He walked the grounds more often, sometimes without even checking his phone. The man who once used tests to measure loyalty had started trusting his instincts instead, because Naomi taught him something no business deal ever could. That character is louder than words. One afternoon, as the golden sun slanted through the west windows, Victor approached Naomi in the study, the very room where everything had started. He held a small, elegant box in his hand, neatly wrapped in navy blue paper with a silver ribbon. She looked up from her planner, slightly puzzled. "This is for you," he said. Naomi hesitated before taking it. She carefully unwrapped the box and opened it. Inside lay a diamond necklace, the very one she'd seen glinting in the open safe a year ago. The same necklace she could have taken, the one that had once symbolized a trap, a test. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Sir, I don't understand." Victor smiled. "It was never about the necklace," he said. "It was always about who you are." Naomi gave a soft chuckle and gently pushed the box back toward him. "And I still won't take what's not mine." Victor laughed, a full, genuine laugh that echoed in the study. "This time," he said, placing the box back in her hand, "I'm giving it to you." Naomi paused, then closed the lid slowly. Not out of pride, but because the gesture mattered more than the gift. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with something deeper than gratitude. "Not for the necklace, but for seeing me." Victor nodded, a little choked up. "You didn't just pass the test, Naomi. You changed the man who gave it." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that says more than words. Because sometimes the greatest tests don't come with announcements or rules. They come when the cameras are off, the door is open, and temptation stands within reach. They happen in quiet rooms, in moments that seem ordinary. But it's what we do in those moments that defines us. Naomi never asked for a promotion. She never expected a reward. Her choices came from a place deeper than ambition. They came from values. From the example she wanted to set for her son. From a belief that your name matters more than your gain. And so, her story became more than a quiet legend. It became a mirror. A question passed between friends, whispered in offices, and discussed at kitchen tables. What would you do if the safe was open? How could you get away with it? Not would anyone find out. But who would you be in that moment? Naomi's answer changed a household, restored a man's faith, and inspired a community. Because true character doesn't shout. It doesn't need applause. It just does what's right when no one's watching. YW checkmark if you were moved by this story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales that reveal the truth about character and courage. Bellhop Bell, hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that might just change how you see the world. Speech balloon, and let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you found that safe open?